This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review. Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review. I'm your host, Dahlia Shenlin.
And I'm Gilad Halpern.
And every week we interview authors of books and studies and research and things that we find fascinating and important. If you like us, please consider supporting us on Patreon. You'll find out about it on our homepage, tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review.
Our guest today is Lior Sternfeld, Assistant Professor of History and Jewish Studies at Pennsylvania State University, specializing in the social history of Jews in the Middle East, more specifically in Iran, which is the topic of his book Between Iran and Zion, Jewish Histories of 20th Century Iran. It was published in 2018 by Stanford University Press. Interestingly, yet not surprisingly, it will be also the topic of our discussion today. And Lior Sternfeld is joining us on the line from State College in Pennsylvania. Hello, Lior. Welcome to the show.
Hi, I'm so very excited to be on your show.
That's great to hear. So let's start with perhaps a general question. One word in the title of your book, I think, encapsulates your historiographical approach, and that is histories in the plural. Can you unpack this for us and explain how your perspective differs from previous historiography of Iran's Jews?
Thank you so much for picking that up. I think that what my book is trying to do is to argue that there's no meta-history that can fit this entire community of, we're talking about 100,000 individuals throughout most of the 20th century. And until that point, the historiographical trends tended to pack them all under one narrative. And I thought that it's missing the richness of Iranian Jewish history, the diversity of the Iranian Jewish communities. And so from the very beginning, I'm trying to say that we should be more nuanced when we approach Iranian Jewish history. And that's what I'm alluring to in the title.
I think that it wasn't just that you have a mission to be different. You had a specific point that you wanted to make. And I think in the introduction, you state quite openly a certain critique of many histories of Jewish people in general, that they are wedded to a lachrymose narrative, a word you repeat many times. So your work sets out to dispel that. Why did that become a central theme of your book?
Because I think that when we read Jewish history through the lachrymose lens, we blind ourselves to so many of the developments and patterns in Jewish life. We miss even the differences between different types of, for example, Zionism, which is central to the lachrymose view, right? Because Jews were waiting for the redemption, for the Zionist redemption, and only Zionist redemption rescued them from their bitter fate. And then when we try to step back and look at it from different perspective, from non-lachrymose perspective, we can see that Zionism is indeed a central part of Jewish life in the Middle East, but Zionism meant different things in different times in different places. And there's no one Zionism that we tend to imagine when we read history of Jews in the Middle East that fits, the Iraqi Jews in the 1940s and Iranian Jews in the 1960s or Egyptian Jews in the 1950s. Even though, again, in historiography, we tend to imagine this one type of Zionism that was present everywhere.
There's an interesting thing about Iran in particular, and that is that in the interwar period and well into the post-World War II period, it underwent radical modernization processes that, as you show, had a deep impact on its Jews. To what extent did this rapid social change in Iran writ large account for the no less rapid changes within Iran's Jewry?
This is I'm not sure how to answer it, because what I'm showing is that Iran underwent radical changes, as you say, and Jews were part of it because they were part of the Iranian society. and Jews became subject to the same liberties and laws and regulations that other Iranians were subject to. And I think that this is something that, again, is being missed when we read the other narratives of Jewish history in Iran or elsewhere.
That treats Jews as a separate entity within the
Right.
home country. Yeah.
Yeah. The tendency to view Jews as if they lived in isolation or didn't come in touch with the general society. And I'm saying that Jews were part of the same developments in the Iranian society, in the Iranian economy, in the Iranian political sphere as the others. And I mean, there were other developments that were particular to the Jewish community, like immigration out of Iran in the late 1940s after the establishment of Israel, which also had a major impact on the way that the community took shape between 1948 to 1953. But overall, we see that it's the same process that the Iranian society was going through, the Jewish society was going through.
Well, I want to pick up on that. I mean, I see that, throughout the 20th century, you're portraying a picture of the Iranian Jews as rather integrationist, in many ways seeking to be active and integral to Iranian society and even political movements, even while they maintain their community bonds and heritage. In fact, in some parts of your description of their activities, it reminded me of the mood of the educated cosmopolitan Jewish elites in German-speaking regions in late 19th century Europe and through part of the 20th century. Is it comparable? And did you maybe consciously try to portray that picture that would be familiar to many of the readers of European Jewish history?
No, I don't think. I mean, obviously, I can see the resemblance, but this is not something that I tried to put it on a similar basis for comparison reasons. This is something that I think happened because of the nature of the integrationist wishes of Iranian Jewish leadership, but also the society at large. And this was, again, something that encompassed the entire Iranian society, because this was part of the nation-building project of the Shah to create this one society that includes all the minorities, the ethnic minorities, the religious minorities. So this is something that pretty much came from the top down. And the example of the German-speaking Jews in the 19th century, you can take it to the 20th century with the American Jewish community, especially around the 30s and 40s. But this is something that was picked up even by the Israeli officials, I would say, in the 1960s when they realized that what they're looking at is a Jewish community that behaves differently than other Middle Eastern Jewish communities.
Did they see themselves as Iranian patriots?
Absolutely. 100%.
How did that express itself, especially through the upheavals of, 1953 and then later, but maybe start with 1953 and the protest, the overthrow, the regime change, installing the Shah and then later in the Iranian Revolution. How did it express itself, this patriotism?
I would start in 1951 with the ascendance of Mossadegh to premiership in Iran. And we see that there were important Jewish figures in the Iranian political sphere that supported Mossadegh from very early on, including Jewish journalists and editors, and some of them became even very close to Mossadegh. And we see, I interview in the book, one of my interviewees was a elementary school student, and he went to school and wrote on the blackboard, "Yankees go home." And for him, this was a manifestation of his Iranian patriotism. But in the community sense, 1953 was a watershed moment, right? It was a moment in which the political activism had to be separated from the community identity. And we see the beginning of the Iron Fist era of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah.
What do you mean by what you said, that it had to be separate, that the political activism had to be separate from the community identity?
we see that until 1953, there was very heavy Jewish involvement in or support for the Tudeh party, for example. And Jewish publications overwhelmingly tended to be on the lefty side. So the Jebhei Meli, the National Front, but also the Tudeh and other organizations and cultural social organizations that were heavily supportive of Mossadegh and the Communist Party. After 1953, after the coup, we see that there's no official Jewish publication that keeps that line of Iranian national, being part of the national movement of the Jebhei Meli or the Tudeh party, because the Tudeh party became illegal. So all the organizations and the societies that were part of this mechanism had to transform themselves. We still see underground activity of Jewish students in the Tudeh organizations abroad, in Germany and in the US. But in Iran, all those clubs and newspapers and magazines had to take different shape.
Another interesting thing, Dali compared the Iranian Jewish story to Europe in the 19th century, and you added America in the 20th century. And I'd say the flip side of it is really how different the story is from other Middle Eastern Jewish stories in other places in the Middle East. Because right at the moment, where in many countries in the Middle East, I'm alluding to the late 1940s, the Jewish community was destroyed. This is in Iran, however, the moment in which, in many ways, the Jews started the golden age in this country. And against that backdrop, I'd like to ask you to maybe lay out some of the considerations and the points of debate that were among the Jewish community in relation to the, torn between the patriotism and the Zionism for many that led some of them to make Aliyah and leave Iran for Israel, and others who chose to stay because, in Iran, unlike other places, say Iraq or Egypt, they weren't forced out.
You're right to point out to the fact that the Iranian Jewish community goes the opposite direction of the other Jewish communities, but also it's a time where the Jewish community even grows and become more diverse than ever before. Iraqi Jews, we're talking about 10 to 15,000 Iraqi Jews that chose to relocate to Iran.
Including some after they moved to Israel. Is that correct? You document what I thought was a fascinating point. Why? I know this is a diversion, but it is an interesting thing.
No, I think it ties into my question as well.
Yeah, there you go. It ties in.
So in 1949, 1950, 1951, we talked about the Iraqi Jews that pretty much 150,000 Iraqi Jews that had to leave the country. And those who came to Israel were settled in few ma'abarot.
Transit camps, as they know.
Transit camps, yeah. In the ma'abarot, at least in two ma'abarot, in Amisav and in Jerusalem, they shared the space with Iranians. In few occasions, we have documented demonstrations of the Jewish Agency and the Israeli government, and some of the Iraqi leadership in the Ma'abarot wanted to go back to Iraq.
Wait, what were the demonstrations for? What were they demonstrating against?
Against the discrimination, against the conditions in the Ma'abarot, against the treatment that they got from the establishment, against, they felt, I think it may be oversimplification, but I think that they felt that they were deceived in this move. And some of them, and I show in the book that some of them held signs that they wanted to go back to Iraq. But look what's happening. They cannot go back to Iraq, but they realized that the second best for them would be to go to Iran. And Iran is a country that Israel has formal ties with. There are flights between Tel Aviv and Tehran. And there is an Iraqi Jewish community that started to settle in Tehran and in Abadan from the 1940s. So we see immigration of Iraqi Jews that wanted to return to Iraq but couldn't. And for them, the Iraqi Jewish community in Tehran was a good enough substitute for that.
This is a strange question, but didn't they have a language barrier?
Yes and no. They did speak Arabic, of course, but the Iraqi Jewish school in Tehran, for example, which became a model school in the 1960s, was called the Tefaq. And this school was run according to the British curriculum. The languages in school were Arabic, English, French, Hebrew, and Persian.
Those were the days. People actually learned languages.
Yeah.
No, but Leo, going back to my question about the tension between the Zionist aspirations and the temptation of being part of the new Iranian nation.
I'm easily distracted, right?
No, it's our fault because I took us down a completely different path.
No. So for them, and this is where it's easier to compare it to the American Jewish community. For them, Zionism didn't necessarily mean immigrating to Zion. For them, Zionism meant supporting the Jewish national home. Some of them express it explicitly that Zionism is a wonderful solution for those who cannot stay in their countries and needed this shelter. For them, this was they supported. They raised money for the JNF. They raised money for Jewish causes. But I'll give you an example which I like very much, and this is Habib Levy, who was one of the leaders of the Iranian Jewish community. If you read his memoir, he was the founding father of every and any Zionist organization in Iran, Zionist publications, and so on. But he never moved to Israel. He talks about his relationship with Ben Gurion and Ben Tzvi and how he bought a hotel in Jerusalem and he wanted to get buried in Israel, but he never moved to Israel. And in 1979, when he leaves Iran, he moved to Los Angeles. And then in the second to last page in his memoir, in an incredible moment for me as a reader, he says, "So you probably wonder how come I never moved to Israel." And the answer is that the taxes were too high.
He was not going for the old joke, how do you make a small fortune in Israel? Come with a big one. Let me ask you something on that line. First of all, that's a great story. That's really a great story. Secondly, I think a major theme that comes out as you move into the phase of the Shah through to the Iranian Revolution, especially during and after the revolution, is the deep kind of chasm between how the Iranians look at Jews either as Zionists or Jews, and how that becomes such a central and very dangerous feature of living in the Jewish community in Iran. Can you explain how that tension kind of played out or how it evolved?
So this was something that especially in the 70s, as you said, especially in the 70s, the Iranian Jewish, the new leadership, the younger generation tried to really tackle it.
The younger generation of Jews or Iranians?
Of Jews.
Jews. I mean, Jewish Iranians.
Yeah. And we can talk a lot about the role of Israel in the political discourse in Iran in the 70s. But Israel had a very bad reputation especially among dissidents, right? Because not because of the Palestinian issue, but because of its alliance with the Shah. The Shah was very proud of his relationship with the Israeli military. Israel was very proud of its relationship with the Shah. And the Iranian Jewish leadership, the younger generation, wanted to distance itself from the old guards of the community and from the politics of supporting Israel. So they started these public education programs in terms of politics. So it aimed at the community and the younger generation of the community. And they started summer camps and after school programs. And they wanted to bring together, obviously, the Jewish youth, but also to bring non-Jewish kids from the neighborhood around the Jewish institutions and give them scholarship and to expose them to the younger generation and its ideas of the Iranian nation. And it was also in more public debates, they tried to make the distinction between Jewish identity and Zionism. And one of my favorite stories from just after the revolution was there was a program on the Iranian television. It was in April 1979. So 2 months after Khomeini returned to Iran. And it was Passover, and this was probably the most chaotic time of the Iranian revolution, but also it was almost, a euphoria because people believed that the Iranian revolution can go anywhere and develop this utopian model. And the Iranian television dedicated a program to Passover and the values of Passover and going from slavery to freedom, and Khomeini and Moses were compared as well. So just before the end of the show, the host asked the two Jewish guests. One of them was a rabbi in the community, and the other was Azizdan Eshrad, who was Jewish to the activist, and he was member of the Constitution Drafting Committee. And he asked them, is it true that all the Jews are Zionists? Now, to say something like that in April 1979, when one of the declared targets of the Iranian Revolution was to undo everything that is related to Iran and Israel, and Zionism had become, a target to say that on national television that Iranian Jews are Zionists. It was pretty explosive.
And dangerous, right? Was this before or after the execution of one of the Jewish community leaders? I think his name was Elkanah.
Yeah, just before the execution of Elkanah. And the Iranian rabbi was the first to come up with an answer. And he said, what is Zion? Do you know? Zion is the biblical name of Jerusalem. If loving Jerusalem, loving Zion makes me a Zionist, then yes, I'm a Zionist and all the Jews are Zionists. You're a Muslim, right? He turned to the host. You like Mecca, right? Does it make you a Saudi? And you have to understand that if there is one political entity that is even more hated than Israel.
And some things really haven't changed. But I do want to ask you, I mean, during this time, you document what, in a modern reading through in the filter of modern times is really quite remarkable, that many Jews actually cheered the return of Ayatollah Khomeini and disavowed Zionism and swore their support for the Palestinian cause. When you explain it in the book, it makes sense. But for our listeners, can you explain how that happened?
Yeah, again, this is something that this is what I call in the book the unintended consequences. The Shah wanted to unite the nation and all the minorities and put them together under this one Iranian Persian identity. And it worked. In the 1970s, Jews, or many of the Jews, most of the Jews, had a self-perception of them as Iranians first and Jews. It's not that Jewish is secondary to Iranian, but Israel doesn't have room between these two identities. And for them, the concerns of the non-Jewish Iranians was their concerns. They didn't have different priorities because they were Jewish. They had different priorities because of their, in my opinion, because of their class and being, upper middle class in one of the most popular revolutions that partly were motivated by economic issues. But in terms of identifying with the causes of the revolution, they really felt that they share the same concerns as the non-Jewish Iranians. And so Khomeini, his promise was not to establish an Islamic Republic. That's
what we forget.
Yeah. And Khomeini wanted, not Khomeini, the revolutionary movement, in their ideal, it was to establish an Iranian Republic. This was the chant in the streets. They wanted freedom, independence, and an Iranian republic.
Do you think that the Jews' disavowal of Zionism in this case was genuine, or was it really a strategic choice to sidle up to the new regime that's still was still unknown?
It was sidle up or save their skin. It's you have a choice about whether to disavow Zionism or not. Here, we're going to shoot your community leader on the street. What do you think?
I think that you'll find generational differences. The old generation definitely felt greater loyalty to the Shah, and those who symbolically went along with the revolutionary movement did it in order to save the skin of the community. And we see, Chacham Yedidia Shofet, one of the religious leaders of the chief rabbi of Iran at the time, he was a personal friend of the Shah. And just before the Shah left, he told him, "I love you. I think I wish you could stay here, but your time is over. And for the best, for the Iranian people, you should leave." And a delegation of Iranian Jewish leaders went to Paris in late 1978 to meet with Khomeini and work on the definition of Iranian Jews within the Iranian nation, which is something that Khomeini repeatedly said after he came back, that Iranian Jews are not Zionists, Zionism is not a religion, and we consider the Iranian Jews to be our brothers and sisters. And then there were the hardcore leaders of the newly elected Iranian Jewish leadership, and they were revolutionaries. They were political dissidents in the time of the Shah. They shared prison cells with the revolutionary leaders. And they won the elections in 1978. So in March 1978, they won the elections to the leadership of the community. So even those who did not share their point of view politically still voted for them, right? When they could vote for the old guards of the community. And in March 1978, I don't know how many people believe that within 9 months, the Shah will be out of the country. So this is where I find the argument that they did everything to save their skin historical, because, again, a lot happened in these 9 months, and a lot could have happened, and they still elected the revolutionary leadership.
Leo, tell us a bit about your work on the book, the process of the research, because you're an Israeli based in the US. I mean, if only you had some Saudi roots, it could get worse when it comes to an Iranian perspective, as you said, without any physical access to whatever is there in Iran, whether it's people or archives or whatever that you need as a researcher. And also your Israeli affiliation might have endangered some of the people you worked with on the ground. Was this a concern at all? How did you go about it?
I would also like to state for the record that one time I was in a room with an Iranian and they refused. We were in a classroom and somebody wanted to take a picture and he refused to be in the same photo as me. Not because he didn't like me, but I think he was worried. So, I mean, it's a very serious issue that Gilad is asking.
It is a very serious issue. I was fortunate enough to work on my PhD at the University of Texas at Austin. And it gave me this affiliation as American University, right? So I knew that working in Iran and in Iranian archives is out of the question, but the second best is Los Angeles, Tehrangeles. And I went to Los Angeles many times, and UCLA has amazing collection of Iranian Jewish writings, publications. I interviewed many people from the Iranian Jewish community. The University of Texas, where I got my PhD, the libraries acquired collections of Jewish publications. And then it's true that my access was limited, but thankfully, we live in an era where you can communicate with Iranians in other means. And my interviewees opened doors for me in Iran with their friends and families, and I end up interviewing some of them on Skype and others in Europe or Israel even. And protecting their safety was one of my primary concerns. And I consulted with historians who use the methods of oral history. And we came up with methodology that would address the needs of my research and also the need to protect the identity of my interviewees. So I end up working with oral history, but also private collections and family archives. And I hired research assistants in Iran, and friends and colleagues of mine who went to Iran helped me when they could as well.
And they didn't feel in danger?
No, because again, it's it's complicated, but we made sure that there is no trace of them linked to me.
I want to ask you something that goes back to a point you made earlier, and this will probably be our last question. When you pointed out that Israel had a bad reputation throughout the 70s because of its relationship with the Shah, who was a hated authoritarian leader installed by foreign powers, basically, it really made me think of, this may not, you could feel free to say this really is beyond your kind of area of research, but I'm thinking about this sort of grandstanding of Netanyahu's burgeoning relationships with rather authoritarian leaders in the Gulf states and possibly in the near future even Saudi Arabia. Do you think that that's going to generate a similar dynamic whereby the people of those countries say, ultimately, we now dislike you in the long term because you have been such a proponent and supporter and ally of these authoritarian leaders that we may submit to, but we kind of hate them?
That's a great question, and as historians, we hardly know what happened in the past, let alone knowing what will happen in the future.
That's okay. Political scientists don't know what's going on in the future either.
But I'll say that in the Iranian context, Israel missed a lot. It missed a lot because in the 1960s, the reputation of Israel was profoundly different than what it ended up being in the 1970s. In the 1960s, in 1961, there was a major earthquake in Qazvin in Iran, and Israel was one of the first countries to assist Iran and help to rebuild the region and help to develop new agricultural technologies in the region. And friends of mine who grew up in Qazvin in the 60s and 70s told me how they remembered, like they were not allowed to say anything bad about Jews or Israel.
That's a great way to make people feel bad about something, is to tell them they can't say it.
No, but I have stories. We don't have time for that, but maybe in another time. And also the intellectual elite of Iran was very sympathetic to Zionism. And two things happened. One, in 1967, which turned Israel in the eyes of the Iranian intellectual elite from a post-colonial power to a colonial power. And second, Israel increased its involvement within the security apparatus of the Shah and was very proud in selling the Uzis to the Iranian army and arming the Air Force and the infantry. And so all of a sudden, all the memories of Israel doing really charity work in the 60s. And let's not think that they didn't do military export as well in the 60s. But at the same time, the Iranians had the view of Israel as at least not completely bad, not totally bad. And in the 70s, it disappeared. Israel was only in the context of the armed forces, the Savak. The Savak is the secret police. The Savak, all the generals that came to Iran, there was, it was a military and power show-off. So, and this what remained in the memory of Iranians until the revolution. I don't know how it's going to roll out with the Emirates and Saudi Arabia, but there's a reason to be worried.
And on this optimistic note, I'm afraid our time is up. But we'd like to thank you very much, Lior Sternfeld, for coming on the show. And I would like to tell our listeners to read your book, Between Iran and Zion, which is eye-opening in many, many ways. So many thanks to you, Lior.
Thank you very much.
And also many thanks to Itai Shelem, our producer and sound engineer. And now we've got a request. Many or most of you listen to us on the Apple Podcasts app and would like to ask you to please consider writing us a review of any kind. You too can support us by going to our website and subscribing to our Patreon campaign. You can check out our archive. It has more than 600 interviews. You can like us on Facebook and, of course, follow me and Dalia on Twitter. Don't forget to join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And until then, from Dalia and from me, goodbye.